Hello and welcome. In today's video, I'm going to show you a very creative self-exploration process. You can think of it almost like a game because it's going to use a lot of elements of role-playing games. And you can use a variety of different types of cards and tools that you might have available to you. I'm going to go through different types of cards you can use even within the same category. So tarot, oracle, imagery, you can use dice, and lots of role-playing game energy. And as all my card play related types of processes, this is not for prediction, it's not for analysis. It's just kind of this process that is kind of relaxed and casual and fun so that insight can emerge through play. I'm not going to go into too much detail on how to specifically work with each component. I think of this as kind of like a one-shot RPG. Maybe I'll do that in another video just so that this isn't super long, but I will go through each step and kind of talk a little bit about different card types that you could use for each one. So the first step is to create the character. And you can use different types of cards for that. So you could go through a Lorcana deck if you have one and separate out the characters. As many characters as you would want to kind of pull from to choose randomly. As I have talked about in some of my other videos, each of the character cards in Lorcana has a color assigned to it. So if you wanted to layer in aspects of the color and what that might represent, you certainly can. If you wanted to pull from the copy on the page or any other element of the card, you certainly can. But at its basic level, if you wanted to use Lorcana, it would just be kind of a little bit of the character, maybe pulling in particularly the imagery, so like how they look, to kind of just like develop a little bit of that character energy, really kind of tuning into like the posture, the facial expression, any kind of like symbolism that you are tuning to. So you can certainly use Lorcana cards for that. You can also use tarot or oracle cards where each card has like a person or like a figure on it. So, if you pulled this card, this would be what you're using as your inspiration for your character. This obviously is a character with a really strong positioning. Maybe this is your character. So, tarot or oracle cards that have like figures on them in some way that you can kind of pull from to start to put together who your character is. And then the next part is to think about their role. So you have a character, but how are they showing up in this world? And there's a lot of different types of ways that you can go about looking for the role. So I'm going to go through a bunch of them. So one is, I have these cards. They're called Cthulhu cards, and they have different types of categories in them. They call these character cards, but I think of them more as like roles. And when I'm thinking about roles, I'm also thinking of like archetypes. So clone, coffin maker, cyborg, explorer, fool, gatekeeper, ghost, things like that. Although I guess a ghost could also be a character. These are a little bit fluid. Carolyn Miss archetype deck is also really, really good for this. Again, these are very archetypal, right? Artist, a nature child, messiah, hermit, things like that. So you can use something like that, something that has a lot of archetypes in it. This is a game called Written in the Cards, and I like these cards for a variety of different ways, but if I'm going to use them in this type of purpose, if you notice, each card has like kind of like a symbol, but then the flip side is like the fake, the easy, the modest. So these could almost be kind of like the roles that you are then layering onto the character. So if I have, let's do like Robin Hood, and I'm using one of these types of cards, it could be Robin Hood the Abandoned, right? So whatever the world, whatever the story I'm going to be placing this character in, this is its role. It's been abandoned, right? Maybe that's a little bit of like backstory and history to it. Another type of deck that you can certainly use are like unstable unicorns, because each of the unicorns is almost like an archetype, like a basic narwhal. So again, this unicorn is kind of like basic, and whatever that means to you. Baby, maybe it's like its inner child. Magical, has magical powers. It's kind of like this enchanted kind of a character, playing around with that idea. Unicorn phoenix, right? Kind of this archetypal idea of the phoenix rising. What else? There's a lot of basic and baby ones in here, but unicorn oracle, like extremely destructive, like this really chaotic energy, right? If we're pairing this kind of archetypal energy with this kind of a character, we're kind of starting to develop the story in some way. And I also made a lot of like archetype role cards. So, you know, just pulling one of these randomly. So crone, again, inner child, mystic, giant. Again, the giant could be like kind of a character, or it could also be a role. Kind of depend. I mean, there's a little bit of flexibility around this. Spirit of the forest. So maybe kind of introducing this like little spiritual component to how Robin Hood is being portrayed in whatever world we're going to be generating and exploring. You can also have a list of different types of roles, and then you could like roll a die or some dice for that part too. So then the next step is the world, and there's a lot of course, different ways to generate the world. I also want to mention cards. There's lots of like RPG decks, and this is from Elements of Inspiration, and they have different types of landscapes. So like for waterways, there's also and the little symbols say what the cards are, but these are also ways to kind of generate a little bit of the world, and even to come up with like the character or the role. So lots of different ways to do that also. This is an oracle deck, and I like this one because if you want to explore the home or parts of a house, rooms in a house, I think this is super excellent for that, because even though like the oracle has different types of objects on it, like first aid kit, fence, street lamp, vase, these could also very much be rooms in a house, right? Fireplace could be like the living room, bathtub is a bathroom, the kitchen, you know, maybe this is like a study or an office or something. Same with this. So this could be a really cool way to kind of bring in that world building in a much more personal, intimate like space. Again, there are, you know, role-playing game decks that you can use for world building. And then I also really like just using general imagery cards. So this is just a pack of like imagery cards. They're all very purple, but kind of like using one of these to generate like the tone of the world that you're going to be in. A lot of these are like this one, you know, maybe there's like a storm, kind of this like electrical lightning energy. So kind of just using the imagery to kind of world build and extrapolate like what kind of a world this is occurring in. And Dixit cards are great for this. There's also like a similar to Dixit, these like windmill cozy stories cards, which are also really kind of like abstract and surreal in a sense, right? So like this, you know, like what kind of a world is happening around this? What's the larger kind of context in which this like scene is happening, right? If this is true, what else must be true about this world, kind of a thing. So kind of a really fun way to play with worlds. You can also use, for example, location cards from Lorcana, separating them out the same way that you may have separated out the character cards. So, you know, taking place in Atlantica or Neverland, Winter Camp, Rapunzel's Tower. So, you know, that's one way. Again, the Cthulhu cards have like habitat. So an abandoned place. You could also kind of pair things, right? So a cave somewhere coastal, or it's in the desert, which isn't like super specific, but you know, you can, or it could take place in a dream world, Dust Bowl. So lots of different ways to play around with that. And then of course I also made kind of like archetypal location cards. So it could just pull, if you wanted to make your own set of like small cards, you could do that, or you could create like a list and roll for it. So again, forest, desert, of course, an arcade, between worlds, a Ferris wheel, things like that. So that's kind of a little bit of the world building parts. And then you can next introduce the conflict. So this kind of shows the tension point that makes it difficult for the main character to play its role in this world. So what is the conflict? And again, a Dixit card, you know, something that's just very visual. I think this is the Disney Dixit. You know, and just kind of like, again, using this just as a point of inspiration to introduce the conflict. You can also use something like never mind. That's for the next part. That's for the quest part. But, you know, so these are Lenormand's cards, but you can use tarot or oracle here. Again, where you're just kind of using some element of the card to represent a conflict. And just really kind of largely going off the imagery from the card. And then finally is the quest. And you can roll for this. You can have like a list of quest ideas. The quest answers what would move this story forward, like despite this conflict. It's kind of, the conflict is showing us where the character is getting tangled, and the quest is kind of how action can untangle it. And so you can certainly roll for it. This is a book called Roll and Play, and it has this like campaign ideas. You know, it's an origin must be investigated with caution. So just different types of kind of like, what's the quest here that this character with this conflict is now kind of going on or towards. Again, you can also use things like game decks. This is a bunch of side quests. You can just use imagery, of course, to kind of think about what the quest is going to be and kind of use that as your starting point for kind of developing what that looks like. And there's a lot more nuance in terms of how you actually go about working with a lot of these cards. Again, that probably will be another video. But then finally, the final step is to kind of debrief, to step out of the game and look at the whole picture of what was created, right? So we have a character, a world, they have a role in this world, there's a conflict, and there's a quest. And standing back and looking at what was created, then we kind of start to think about, how does this map onto my life? Where am I reflected? What feels familiar to me? Right? And the whole point is that we don't go into this like with this intent. Well, I guess we kind of go into it with this like curiosity and exploration kind of a mindset. And we're basically playing a game. And the game shows us something that is true about us. And that's where kind of like the magic of this work really is using that kind of playful and curious energy and really kind of harnessing it to kind of be a mirror, at least in some small way, for ourselves. Like, what can we derive from this process personally? So that's an overview of this process. In another video, I will very likely go into how to specifically work with each of the different components that I just described.